Hello, Topeka West students. My name is Professor Jones, and I teach religious studies at Washburn University, just down 21st Street from where you are right now. And your teacher asked me if I would put together a short presentation for you about the printing press and the impact of the printing press on the history of early modern Europe. And so that's what I'm going to try to do here in about 5 minutes. I'm going to first show you where the first printing press was built in Europe, and then talk about how printing presses worked and how printing presses affected the process of bookmaking. And then I'm going to finish up by talking a little bit about the impact that printing had on Western history. I'm going to talk about how printing made it possible for Protestants to separate from the Catholic Church, and it made it possible for countries like France to exist. So some pretty big stuff. Let's go ahead and get started. Okay, so we are right now looking at where you are. This is an aerial shot of Topeka West High School, which is absolutely full of books, and you just assume naturally that the books at your school are all the same if they have the same cover. So 2 copies of any 2 books at your school, you assume naturally are identical to each other, right? That's because of printing. Most of the books at your school were produced by printing presses, now digital printing presses that can crank out thousands of copies in a couple of hours. That hasn't always been the case. It used to be that books had to be written by hand, and that was a very different process. So I want to take you from where you are right now to where that first happened, where for the first time books started to be produced by printing rather than by hand. And that first happened in the city of Mainz, Germany. So go with me. We're going to travel across the Atlantic Ocean, across Europe, and now we're looking at the modern-day country of Germany, and right here, the city of Mainz, where Gutenberg's printing workshop would have been located. And as we go even further down, we're going to see where that workshop would have been located specifically. So hang on just a second. So there we're zooming in on the city of Mainz itself, and now we are looking at the downtown of Mainz, and you can see the cathedral in Mainz, which would have existed at the time. And right here, this little tower that the cursor is on right now, that is all that is left of the workshop where Johannes Gutenberg and Peter Schaeffer invented printing and printed the first books, and in particular printed the Gutenberg Bible, which we're going to have a look at. And I want to focus on this tiny piece of ground right here where printing was invented, because the impact of printing has been worldwide. It's been immeasurably vast. And I want you to see that it started in a very small place with a couple of guys and a forge and a big idea. So anyway, let's now look at what a printing press looked like and how it changed the way that books are produced. Okay, so right now you're looking at a picture not of printing presses, but rather how things would have been produced before the existence of printing presses. And you can see, right above me here, there's a monk, and he's sitting on an uncomfortable looking chair, and he looks tired, and he's hand copying a book. You can see up here at the top where he is looking, or where his original is, and then he's copying this onto this. And you can begin to imagine just how long it takes to produce a book when you have to copy it out by hand. You can see over here, this is a picture of the oldest complete edition of the Hebrew Bible, the Jewish Bible, the Christian Old Testament, written in Hebrew, and so you read it this way. You read it from right to left, like this. It would have taken scribes years to produce this entire text from beginning to end. It was a vast undertaking. And here's the other thing that is important about writing before printing presses. Because everything has to be written out by hand, no 2 copies of anything are exactly alike. And so if we're talking about Bibles, one of the most important books that has ever been produced, a book that people regard as, having divine origins, having authority over human life, what if no 2 copies of the Bible are the same as each other? How do you figure out which one is right if no 2 copies are the same? And so before printing, you could never know for sure which one was the right one, which one was the definitive copy. They're all different from each other. Printing changed that. So this is, right above me, you can see here, a page from the Gutenberg Bible, the first major mass-produced book in Western Europe. Gutenberg and Peter Schaeffer worked and produced this book in the 1400s. And over here, you can see, other way, there we go. You can see a printing press. And the printing press, it's a very simple machine, but it took a long time to get all the pieces to work just right. You can see how it works. Down here, you would have put some individual letters made out of a lead alloy, and you would have arranged them in the order that you wanted for the page that you're producing. And then you would take a piece of paper, and you would lay it over top of those letters covered with ink, and then you would use this handle here and turn it and turn it and turn it until this piece right here came down on top of it and smushed the paper onto the letters. And that's how you produced type. And so you could put one piece of paper after another, after another, after another on that printing press until you'd produced as many copies of that page as you wanted. Then you do the same thing with every other page, and then you'd glue them all together, and bada bing, you have not just one book, but as many books as you need. 100 books, 1,000 books, 700,000 books. That's how many copies of the works of Erasmus were produced during his lifetime. So you can see what a revolution this was in terms of how people got access to information. In the old days, if you wanted a book, you had to have a monk sit at a desk for 6 months and write it. Now, you can go down to your local bookstore and buy a copy that is identical to every other copy of that book. It's a complete change. It has two immediate implications for how people deal with books. It means, first of all, every copy of a book is going to be the same. And second of all, it means that books become much, much less expensive. Now, suddenly, average people, middle-class people, merchants, even farmers can afford to have books. So it expands literacy. More people are reading. Let's talk about now the wider implications of the invention of the printing press, okay? So the first thing that would never have happened without the printing press is the existence of nation-states. So real quick, what is a nation-state? You might be covering this in class. A nation-state is a country where most people in the country think of themselves as being from the same group. So for example, you're looking right now, this is a picture of France. Now, in modern-day France, most people who live in France think of themselves as French. That sounds dumb to say because it should be so obvious, but it's not obvious. It's actually a very new phenomenon. It dates back to about the time of the printing press, a couple hundred years after that maybe. Before that, people in France would have thought of themselves as being from their local region. So somebody who lived up here would have thought of themselves as Norman or Britannian. Somebody from here would have thought of themselves as Burgundian or Alsatian, or my French pronunciation is horrible. I'm not even going to inflict that on you, but they would have thought of themselves as being very local. But the printing press allowed people in the center of the country, like Paris, to send identical copies of literature in the same language, the same kind of French, to the far corners of their kingdom. And it meant that people began to speak the same type of French everywhere, and that helped them to see that they were part of the same group. It allowed the creation of what we now think of as normal nation-states, countries like France, and Spain, and Germany, and the United States of America. The other thing that would never have happened without the printing press is the Protestant Reformation. So, anybody know when the Protestant Reformation happened? It happened less than 100 years after the invention of the printing press. And the cornerstone belief of the Protestant Reformation was this motto right up here, sola scriptura. That's Latin for by scripture alone. It means that to be a Protestant is to believe that every Christian has the right to read scripture, read the Bible for themselves. Now, in order to read the Bible for yourself, what do you need? You need to have a Bible. And I mean, now, in our culture today, there are Bibles everywhere. But before the printing press, Bibles were very hard to get a hold of. So the Protestant Reformation couldn't have happened except that it was now suddenly capable of producing many copies of the Bible for individual ordinary people to have. And so the printing press, when you think about the impact of nation-states and the Protestant Reformation, it's an enormous impact on the world. And all of that goes back to that little tower in Mainz, Germany. Thank you for listening, and I hope that you have enjoyed this brief presentation.